Please recognize Representative Conley to present House Bill 1308.
Clerk will read.
House Bill 1308 by Conley of the House and David of the Senate, Acroling School Safety.
Representative Conley, you recognize to explain your bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We're striking title on this.
Clerk will read the amendment.
Mr. Speaker, I move to amend House Bill 1308 by striking the title. Amendment submitted by Conley.
Representative Conley, you recognize to explain your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This act would add language to the current law
Representative
that would
Conley,
direct...
please suspend. We're just on the amendment to strike
I'm sorry,
title.
sir. I'm not sure what the... Oh, strike title, sorry.
You recognize to explain your amendment to strike title.
What does that mean? I'm just striking title.
Do you yield to questions?
I yield the questions.
All right, seeing no questions, Representative Conley, Representative Russ, do you have a question on the amendment to strike title?
No, I'll wait.
Member waves. Representative Conley now moves unanimous consent that the amendment be adopted. Objection to the be order. Now, Representative Conley, we're on your bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Okay, this act would add language to direct a school district to develop a policy to determine if a student who engages in threatening behavior that has the potential to cause severe bodily harm or extreme violence, whether that student needs a mental health assessment or evaluation administered by a certified personnel that is qualified to do the assessment. I yield for questions.
Member yields. Representative Rush, you're recognized for a question on the bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, I'm going to turn around and read this, so nothing personal, but it does use language like intent, act of threatening behavior. It goes on to leave some things that are relative subjective and based on maybe someone's opinion. Last year we made it law that if they acted this way in school, they had to call the law enforcement. Now, according to what I understand your bill, we're going to have them call law enforcement and they have to be subjected to a mental health evaluation. Does that seem very permanent to you for 17, 18-year-old kids for the rest of their life once that happens?
Thank you for the question. What I believe is that if you look at what happened yesterday in Moore High School, the student came to school in his backpack, had a loaded gun. Under the current law, you're right, he's only referred to the police department. Under this law, it would allow the school district to have the ability to say that that student cannot come back to school until they have a mental health evaluation to make sure that they are actually no threat to the school or the students and teachers. Staff.
You're recognized for follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I represent a large rural district. A lot of our young teenage boys and girls like to hunt and carry guns and shoot guns and all kinds of things. If they go through this mental health evaluation and now they have a mental health file, what do you think the process for the rest of their life is going to be if they want to have a gun or hunt or anything like that?
Thank you for the question. What I believe is that the only way that they're going to not be able to carry a firearm or hunt and that sort of thing is if they actually find that there is a mental health issue. And so, perhaps if some of the students that had been violent in other schools across our nation that had taken guns into high schools and killed kids, and actually in an elementary as well, perhaps if they had had this type of evaluation, maybe this hadn't happened in our other schools across the country.
Representative Randleman, you're recognized for a question on the bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Is it my understanding that in the bill, in the amendment, it was talking about repetitive and harmful behavior?
That is thank you for that question. That is one of the reasons why we've stricken the title on it, is so that we can amend that language and make sure that we get the language just right so that there's no question as to who needs the evaluation. And of course, it'll be up to the professionals that run the school to make that determination.
You're recognized for follow-up.
That would make it a situation where we wouldn't be reporting every child, because kids can go outside and play and make statements and stuff like that, and that would allow the school to actually stop and not report that through that team, correct?
Yeah, thank you for that question, and yes, that is exactly right.
You're recognized for follow-up.
The last thing on that, and then there is a psychological evaluation or assessment by a qualified person. So if he's not reported to the sheriff, doesn't that give an avenue for treatment, what kind of diagnosis, what kind of therapy that individual needs?
Yes, thank you for that. Absolutely.
Representative Goodwin, you're recognized for a question on the bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Certainly concerned that we talk about verbal threat also, and then it says that this psychological test or this assessment would have to be paid for by the parent. And since it's somewhat subjective, do you not think it'd be unfair that you then make the parent pay for this test that is going to be subjective in terms of who's going to be chosen to have to take this test?
Thank you for that. What I think is currently, if you look at policy in Oklahoma City Public Schools for students who have suicide ideation, those students are required to go get a mental health evaluation for threatening their own life, and it's at the parent's responsibility for that. And so I would think that if a student is threatening another student, a teacher, or a school building, that they also should be responsible for that mental health evaluation.
You're recognized for follow-up.
Understanding we have mental health issues, but they're also the saying kids will be kids, and sometimes things are spoken where they're not going to come in and shoot up the building. They're being teenagers, they're being adolescents, and this does not provide any room. It just says verbal threat. So it doesn't provide any room, as you say, for the ideations or somebody has psychosis. This is just any child that might have said, oh, you made me mad, and or whatever. So I'm just concerned. This is a little broad. Would you not understand my concern that the parent is going to have to pay for that assessment? And how much is that assessment going to cost if the parent can't afford it?
Thank you for that question. I don't know what the charges are for those services. That would have to be something that I would have to check on. But what I believe is that it's no different than if the child threatens their own life. Is that we're still going to send that child because under the current policy in Oklahoma City Public Schools, that if a child threatens suicide, the parent is required to take that child to get a mental health evaluation. They have 3 days to do that in, or the parent is reported to DHS. And so why would we not, if the child is threatening another student or a staff member, why would we not require that mental health evaluation?
You're recognized for follow-up.
Agreeing with you that there's severity in degrees, and I'm talking about where this says verbal threat, and thinking about adolescents and high school and middle school, that everybody doesn't have a psychosis, everybody does not need that kind of assessment. And I'm concerned about the parent that cannot afford it if we don't even know how much the assessment is going to cost. It could be $300. I don't know how much this assessment costs. That concerns me. And again, agreeing with you when we're talking about the more severe cases, I think this does not provide for everyday students that behave as kids do.
Thank you for that question. What I believe is that our schools are filled with professionals that understand the difference between somebody just blowing off steam and saying I'm going to kill you, or someone who has had perhaps violence in the past and may have the propensity for it. Our people in our schools are professionals and probably can make that rational decision, but that is also why the title is stricken on it.
Recognize you for one more follow-up. I should get back in the queue.
Thank you. It just brings to mind, we've had incidents there in Bixby where we had a football team that had a tradition of brutalizing and raping, etc. Should not have happened, but I didn't see any professionals coming in, nor were they even, that didn't turn out very well for us. So as we talk about professionals that are going to be on the case, I'm a little concerned. I would hope you would agree with me that we don't always cover all our bases.
Thank you for that, and that is the reason why I'm proposing this bill, is so that we can cover those bases and keep our children and our schools safe.
President Humphrey, you're recognized for a question on the bill as amended. Member waves. Representative Randleman, you're recognized for a question on the bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In fact, I think it's clear, if you'll help me on this, is that's the reason we put that in that bill, is that it's repetitive and it's harmful. That actually factors the children out that's just playing and making false statement. Is that correct?
Thank you. Yes, that is absolutely correct.
You're recognized for follow-up.
One other thing on that is that there are real critical situations in schools that we can't take just for granted. For example, we've completed 44 evaluations on kids that have made these kind of statements. Out of that, 18 was reported to the sheriff, and then the other group was reported for therapy. We've actually had a third grader who hung himself, and that makes these evaluations very important. Would you agree?
I would agree. Thank you for that.
Representative Rowe, you're recognized for a question on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative, would you agree that a school teacher or school personnel is no more educated or trained professionally to diagnose a mental illness than, say, a mental health professional?
Yes, thank you for that, and I would agree with that.
You're recognized for follow-up.
Would you also agree that most children are going to have health insurance who will cover the cost of mental health evaluations, and that any child on Medicaid in this state or any adult for that matter, does not require a referral from a primary care to be evaluated by mental health?
I was not aware of that. Thank you for that.
Representative Sturgeon, you're recognized for a question on the bill as amended.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you agree that it is incumbent upon all school administrators to take seriously any threats maybe toward another student from an individual or to that student themselves?
Thank you for that. I would absolutely agree with that.
President Conley now moves the House Bill 1308 be advanced to general order without objection to the order. Third reading of the bill.
House Bill 1308 by Conley of the House and David of the Senate, enact related to school safety.
President Conley now moves final passage of the bill. Will there be debate? Seeing no debate, the question for the House is shall the bill pass? There is debate. Those wishing to debate for the bill, please press your green button. Those debating against, press your red button. President.
No, I got to vote. Sorry.
President Conley, if you wish to debate for your bill, please press your green button. Chair's prayer to close the queue. Close the queue.
Okay. I guess I'm going to debate.
We have Representative Conley and Randleman for the bill, Representative Russ speaking against the bill. Representative Randleman, you're recognized for 10 minutes speaking in favor of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the things that we have to consider in our schools now is that we have many children that have gone through multiple traumas in early childhood. If you have a trauma in childhood, you don't know whether that trauma is going to lead into depression and anxiety, or whether that trauma is going to lead into a conduct disorder and defiance. If you have a child that has a conduct disorder, that is a child that will plan and come in your school and blow away many people. You have another type of child that if they have depression, they'll come in that school and they're not going to hurt a lot of people, but you put them in a corner, they're going to come back and they're going to stab somebody and hurt somebody and kill them that way. I said just a minute ago that we did 44 evaluations in the state of Oklahoma in the last few years. 18 of those individuals were referred to the sheriff because they were a true threat to the school and would actually plan and commit that kind of violence. The other children were not. But by doing this evaluation, what you actually do is you come up with one diagnosis out of 339. And out of that diagnosis, what you're going to do is you're going to plan the treatment. You're going to know whether that child needs medication. You're going to know what type of therapy that needs. And you're also going to know whether you should let that school back in the public school or not. So there's all types of programs that we can set up for these kids. The advantage in this, if you go this way, when you finish that evaluation, you will know exactly what that child needs, whether you let him back in school, whether his parents need help, whether they need help, or etc. So it's a very good way to go. Someone asked just a minute ago about the cost. If you're going to do this kind of evaluation in Oklahoma, you have to I carry $3 million liability on me to do these evaluations. So the evaluations is going to cost you anywhere from $1,800 to $1,600 to do this evaluation. But the key in this is you really know what that child needs. Somebody does not have to come back and do any further evaluations. It guides everything, and probably the biggest thing that if I can convince you is everybody is in that school is safe. So out of 26 years, we have not missed one as a psychologist doing those kind of evaluations. So I would encourage you to vote yes on this for two factors. It protects everybody if there's a real danger, and it also addresses the representative's question a while ago that if he's really not a threat, you don't send him to the sheriff. He doesn't have a file, and he's already set up to get the help that he needs to treat the type of disorder that he has. That could be schizoaffective disorder, it could be reactive attachment disorder, it could be bipolar disorder, it could be a personality disorder. So it's important to recognize those, and overall we treat all the children and make everybody safe. I refer the rest of my time to Conley.
Representative Conley already has the maximum time. Representative Russ, you're recognized to debate for 10 minutes against the measure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I just want to emphasize this is a very serious bill with very serious implications and consequences. Last year we made it law that if there was a threat or an imminent risk of behavior that the administration of the schools shall notify law enforcement. Now we're adding on to that they also have to have a psychological evaluation if they make a verbal threat. That didn't mean that they did something. They made a verbal threat. When I was a kid, I remember they would say, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words may never hurt me. That was kind of, that's kind of how we played it off. And now we're going to have them call law enforcement. Possibly your parents, if you're parents, you're going to be drug up to the school, you're going to be confronted by the law enforcement. Then you're going to have your son or daughter subjected to a mental health evaluation, and you say, well, what if they find out nothing happens? Well, okay, maybe nothing happens, but DHS is now involved. So now you have a DHS file on record forever, and now you have a mental health file that they have inside there forever that your 11, 12, 13, 14, 17, 18-year-old son or daughter will carry around with them the rest of their life. I don't care what the findings were. They have that file, and it is in place. And if they have to answer, have you ever had a mental health evaluation? You know what your child or your daughter is going to say? If they don't lie about it, if they don't perjure themselves when they become 18 or 21, they're going to say, yes, I had a mental health evaluation. And that file's going to be with them forever. Is it really worth it? I mean, sure. If this is a suicide case, if you want to get real specific about the situations this applies to, I'm all in. Count me in. But if you're going to say verbal threats.
Representative Rouse, please suspend. Please direct your debate to the chair.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If you're going to say, Mr. Speaker, if you're going to say a verbal threat rises to the level of a 12, 13, 14-year-old, rises to the level of calling the law enforcement, turning them into DHS, and having a mental health evaluation started on them, I have deep concerns for the future of our children, our young children that aren't really serious about these things at 12 and 13 years old. They're making gestures. They're being silly. They're acting up. We don't make any concessions for that in this bill. It's assumed that they all either want to take someone's life or take their life or something that we are all concerned about, deeply concerned about, Mr. Speaker. Those are really legitimate things, but this bill does not make any kind of exception for those unfortunate comments that 11, 12, 13-year-old kids may or may make and maybe misbehave or do something they shouldn't, that doesn't rise to the level of law enforcement, DHS, and a mental health file to follow them around the rest of their life. If they want to buy a hunting rifle or a handgun to protect themselves, Even if they didn't have an evaluation that showed that they had mental health problems, I will guarantee you the process to go through will be very different if you have a mental health file and you've ever had a mental health evaluation to go through that process. And it's going to go something like this. Did you have a mental health evaluation? Yes, I did. Well, we're going to have to send this through the process a different route. It may take a year to get some kind of response. And my guess is you're not going to hear back from them if you want to purchase a handgun or a hunting rifle, because they're going to slow play it, and then you may never, ever be able to own one again, depending on what happens in the future. And this is a very serious implications for a lot of kids that are being silly and making comments and doing things that they have no serious intentions of whatsoever that will follow them the rest of their life. I urge you to consider this before we let this go forward, because of the implications that we'll have. I talked to the member. We could have changed some things about this. I don't see any interest in the changes that would have to take place. So I'm therefore urging you to vote no on this bill out of much respect for my members. And Mr. Speaker, thank you for my time. I yield the rest of my time to you.
Thank you for your debate. Representative Rush, Representative Conley, you're recognized for 10 minutes debating in favor of your measure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I specifically asked to have the title struck on this so that we could work on that language. And one of the things that we want to add on there is that it is repetitive and violent threats that are made against a child, a staff member, or a school. I am not taking this lightly. This is very important. And perhaps if we had this measure at some point during some of these other kids' lives that have harmed.
Representative Conley, please suspend. Members, House will come to order. Take your conversations outside. Take your seats. Representative Conley, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Perhaps if we'd had this measure in place in some of these other states where kids have been violently killed in the schools, where they had made threats before. The young man, I believe in Florida, had made several threats. The FBI was aware of him, and yet he had never had a mental evaluation in order to address the issues that he was dealing with. The young man in Moore that took the gun to school yesterday, he was referred to the police department. Now he has a police record, but are they going to do anything with that young man and find out what his motivation was to take that gun to school? Perhaps if this law were already in place, then that young man would go to a mental health professional and find out what's going on with him, and he could get some help before he actually hurts someone. Members, I ask that you vote in favor of this. The title is struck on this. I want to work on the language to get it just right. I have lots of support from other superintendents and from teachers all over the state, and I just ask that you vote in favor of this so that we can continue working on it and get it just right so that it works for the state of Oklahoma and to keep our kids safe.
Members, you've heard the debate. Question for the House: shall the bill pass? The clerk will activate the machine. Charges from us. Roll call in the halls. Roll call is now in progress. Ms. Martinez votes aye. Members wish to vote, change your vote. The chair is preparing to close. President Fincher votes aye. President Kiger votes aye. President Lawson votes aye. Representative Caldwell-Trey votes aye. Representative Blancett votes aye. Representative Moore votes aye. President Wallace votes aye. So Donald votes aye. President Hilbert votes aye. President West Josh votes nay. Declare the vote.
72 aye, 22 nay.
Having received a majority of those elected to the Constitutional House, declare the bill passed. Mr. Florler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Please